Hey everyone, back again for another deck profile video today. Today it's another update video on my Windwitch Trickstar deck. I've made quite a lot of changes this time around just to better serve this meta, and it's running a very small Sky Striker engine. So just note that this deck will not contain Engage at all, only because it's really expensive and I just can't afford it, but honestly I felt like this deck didn't really need it. But yeah, I think the Windwitches are still really good with Trickstars, and the fact that I amplified a little Sky Striker with them, it just still works pretty solidly, and yeah, it's very consistent, so I'll get right to it right away. Alright, so starting off, you run 3 copies of Trickstar Candina. This card is basically Stratos. When this card is normal summon, you can add any Trickstar card from your deck to your hand, so it's really great, and also whenever your opponent activates a spell or trap, you get to inflict 200 points of damage to your opponent, so that's really great. Next up, which I believe is the best Trickstar monster in the entire core, it's Trickster Licorice. Mainly because her effect is not once per turn, and it's quick effect, so you could activate it during your opponent's turn. But you get to reveal this card, target one Trickstar monster you control, bounce it back to your hand, and special summon this card. And if you also, if your opponent activates, or not activates, but adds a card from his deck to his hand, even when he draws one, you get to inflict 200 points of damage to your opponent, and that kind of adds up really quickly too. So yeah, Trickstar Licorice, definitely a must at 3. It comes in handy. What's cool is that if you happen to have all 3 copies in your hand, and let's say the one Candina, you could literally use all 3 of them, target Candina, and you could special summon all 3 at the same time. And of course, last in our Trickstar core, it's 1 copy of Lilybell. I love this card. It's basically the Wadapon of this deck, but it's better in the fact that it has 2000 defense. If this card is added to your hand except by drawing, you get to special summon this card once per turn. And also, this card can attack directly even if your opponent has monsters. And finally, if this card does any battle damage to your opponent, you get to add 1 Trickstar monster from your graveyard back to your hand. So she's a really good recycler and pretty good when it comes to late game. Sometimes early game if you need her, just to get some link plays going, but overall she's just better off for late plays. Alright, so moving on to the Windwitch core, we have 3 copies of Windwitch Icebell. What's really great about this card is that as long as you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, you can special summon 1 Windwitch monster directly from your deck, but it cannot be tributed. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the duration of the turn, except for a level 5 or higher wind monster. But after you do your special summon and you resolve that effect, you can also inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent, so it's really good. So yeah, Windwitch Icebell is really great. I just like the fact that it helps make a first turn Crystal Wing. Which, speaking of which, moving on. With Icebell, the one you want to target is actually Glassbell, because this card is a tuner. And when this card is normal or special summoned, you get to add any Windwitch monster from your deck to your hand. So it's a good way to search out the next card we have here, Snowbell. Snowbell, you don't ever want to draw into it, so that's why I only run it at 1. And that's kind of the standard Windwitch engine anyway. 3 ice, 2 glass, 1 snow. If you have 2 or more wind monsters and no others, you could just special summon this card from your hand. And also, this card is used for synchro material for a wind synchro monster. That monster will no longer be able to be destroyed by card effects. So it's an inherent effect, so like if you summon Crystal Wing, cards like Dark Hole, Raigeki, even Torrential Tribute will not work against him. Alright, so I decided to add this little standalone card just because it really helps boost my defenses when it comes to the Windwitch engine, but it's actually going to be Eater of Millions, only because, yeah, like sometimes like if my Windwitch strategy kind of goes south, I'll at least have something to back myself up and still be able to protect myself just fine, because Eater Millions is really good. By now, everyone should already know what he does, but yeah, you banish 5 cards from your hand, field, or your extra deck face down, and also this card cannot be special summoned by other ways, so you can't revive him, sadly. Also, this card gains 100 attack points for each, 100 attack and defense points, for each face down banished card. Also, this card cannot be tributed, so it's essentially anti-kaiju. And also, once per turn during the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish that target or banish that opponent's monster face down. So like cards like Borreload, if it attacked him, his ability will stack on top. So yeah, he's really great. I recommend running him at least at 2. You can run it at 3 if you want, but I personally just like 2 a little bit better because sometimes I don't want to open up with Eater Mobilize too early sometimes, so you never know when you actually need them. So of course, with this format, what format isn't without hand traps? 3 Drone Lockbird. One of the best hand traps in this format because like a lot of decks are doing searchings now, and as soon as your opponent adds 1 card to his hand, you Drone Lockbird him, and if you have Reincarnation as well, chain with Reincarnation and then Drone Lockbird. That way you can essentially keep your opponent from ever having a hand. So it's like, but you kind of want to wait till your opponent adds a card to his hand first before you Reincarnation him. Note, do not Reincarnation him at the standby phase. That's actually a bad thing, because the thing is, if you Reincarnation Joel, but he ashes it, you lost a resource essentially. Like, and Joel cannot activate his effect, and also you technically have to have 2 Reincarnations to resolve that effect, because Joel cannot stop a search. It's not like Ash Blossom where it just like negates like the entire search, where Drone Lockbird you have to wait till your opponent actually acts a card from his deck to his hand in order to Drone Lockbird him. But yeah, it's still really good though. I still recommend this at 3 at least. That way you have a high chance of drawing into it. Moving on, of course, we got 2 copies of Effect Veiler. I still think this card is really good because, like, since spirals are still a thing, you don't want to let them set off, like, especially with Quick Fix. You gotta Effect Veiler that Quick Fix. I know some Goki cards, it's kind of hard to determine which one is really the one you want to Veiler, but I believe it's probably going to be the Octastretch, essentially, or maybe even the Headbat. I'm not entirely sure. Y'all let me know in the comments. But yeah, Effect Veiler is still relevant. I still think you should run it at least. Next up, of course, we got 2 copies of Ash Blossom. If I had 3, I would definitely run 3, like maybe 3 Ash Blossoms, 3 Drolls. And if I'm able to make room for 3 Veilers, or just make like, or maybe do 2 copies of Ghost Spell, because Ghost Spell is actually really good as well. And I know some people were like, didn't want to run her at the start when she was first released, and now people really want to get her. So I'm like, okay, so like y'all were complaining about Ghost Spell, but now y'all sold it and now y'all want it back. But yeah, if you have an Ash Blossom, run that. Or another good alternative you could run instead of Ash Blossom if you don't have access to it, Ghost Ogre is also a good choice, but I'm not main decking Ghost Ogre in this deck anymore. It's just not as good as in this format as it used to be. But still, you know, like I always have hopes for Ghost Ogre. It's still one of my personal favorites, so again, if you don't have Ash, run Ghost. Moving on, we got 3 copies of Trickstar Lightstage. This card is one of your main searchers of the deck. Lets you search out any Trickstar monster from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, you can target 1 set card on your opponent's spell or trap card zone. While this card is on the field, that set card cannot be activated until the end phase, and if your opponent can't activate it, he has to essentially just send it to the graveyard. And also, this inflicts additional burn damage if your Trickstar monsters do both battle or effect damage, so it's really great just to get yourself a little extra burn hits to your opponent, so it's just really good. And of course, you know, to get Light Stage faster, of course, you gotta run 3 Terraformings. Just so it's basically 6 copies of Light Stage. So yeah, Terraforming, literally still a broken card. And yeah, it's just one of my personal favorite spells, you know? Alright, so now moving on to the Sky Striker engine of the deck. Again, I'm not running Engage. I can't afford them, but honestly, I feel like I don't really need it. Like, this deck can function without Engage. I'm running 3 copies of Sky Striker Mecha Hornet Drones. Amazing card, in fact, because the fact that it's not once per turn. If you control no monsters in your main monster zone, you can special summon 1 Sky Striker Ace token. It's a warrior, dark type, level 1, 0 attack and defense. And also, which by the way cannot be tributed. And if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, when this card resolves, the token's attack becomes 1500 instead. But even then, that's not usually important, because you're just going to essentially use that to make one of your Sky Striker Link monsters. You can even use it to make Link Spider, but it's really optional. In fact, a lot of people who want to run a small Sky Striker engine in their deck mostly just run the drones. They don't really run the Engage. Unless you're focusing on nothing but the Sky Strikers, then yeah, you gotta run the Engage. But if you're just going to run a small engine, Hornet Drones is going to be your best option. Trust me when I say that, it really is. Because you want to be able to get your Kagari, you need to be able to get your Shizuku. And Goki players actually use it to make help make Assault, actually, because it's a warrior type, and Assault just needs to be summoned using a warrior type monster. Or 2 of them, I believe, yeah. So, Sky Striker, Hornet Drones, it's amazing. Alright, so moving on, of course, we got one copy of Jamming Waves. I actually like this a little bit better than Twin Twisters because, like, if you control no monsters in your main monster zone, you can target one set spell or trap on the field, destroy it, and if you do, and if you have 3 or more spells in your grave, you can destroy one monster on the field as well, so it's also pretty good. So this card acts as both, basically is my Twin Twisters of the deck, and it's really not hard to keep my main monster zone empty, actually. I just, like, if I have a strategy in mind, I probably activate the Sky Striker cards first, and then move on to my main strategy. That way I can get things going. Alright, of course, here are the following spells just to, keep myself from being disrupted. We have the Hand Trap Killer, Called by the Grave. I main 2 of them, actually, but I do have a 3rd on my side just because you never know when you need it. I couldn't bring myself to bump this up no more than just 1, actually, but it's Pot of Desires. I tried running it at 2, but honestly, it was too much, and half the time I always drew into my second Pot of Desires when I activated the first one. And most of the time, I always just banished everything I actually needed. And it just wasn't good for me, so I was like, you know what? I'll just play Pot of Desires at 1 and only use it in an emergency, Like, if it's the last card of my hand, then I'll play Pot of Desires. The reason I just don't want to play it as much anymore is because, like, again, I lose half of my cards that I actually need, and plus, most of the time, I always end up getting everything I need at the start of the duel anyway. So, like, Pot of Desires is just something you don't want to take too lightly. I know some decks can get away with running 3, some with just 2, but for me, on this deck, I have to just run it with just 1, honestly. Of course, moving on, we have Monster Reborn and Regeki. And finally, for the last of the main deck, we got 3 copies of Reincarnation. By now, everyone already knows what this does. You banish your opponent's entire hand, and he has to draw the same number of cards. And those who want to get into Trickstars, you literally only have to wait till like Friday, maybe Thursday at the earliest, which, because Battles of Legend Relentless Revenge has confirmed that Trickstar Reincarnation is getting a reprint, and it's a secret rare there as well, so you might have a much higher chance of being able to get this card at a much cheaper price. So, Trickstar people who want to play Trickstars, definitely get it while you can. It's definitely going to drop in price, hopefully, and you guys can finally get a chance to play Trickstars. Alright, so moving on to the extra deck now, we have 1 copy of Holly Angel, just because, like, she's honestly the best Trickstar Link monster, aside from Delphino. I do love Delphinum, I think she has an amazing effect, but with this deck, it's really hard for me to work with Delphinum, just because, like, it's not as relevant with the Windwitches as I would have wanted them. So for now, I'm only focusing on 2 Trickstar Link monsters, which are Holly Angel, and of course the next one, Crimson Heart, just to get a little bonus draw power. And the fact that if my points are higher than my opponent by 2,000, I get to draw 2 cards instead of 1. And of course, my opponent also gets to draw a card as well if I choose to activate her effect by pitching a Trickstar card for cost. So she's essentially 1 day of peace, if you want to think of it that way. Of course, for the Sky Striker cards, as I mentioned, we ran 2 copies of Kagari, just because she helps me recycle both my Hornet Drones and my Jamming Waves. Next up, we got Shizuku, which lets you search out a Sky Striker spell from your deck as long as it's different from the one that's in your graveyard. So Shizuku is pretty good, but Kagari is really the one you wanna focus on the most. We got Underclock Taker, and of course the standard Deco Talker. Now this card is just straight up hilarious with Trickstars, just because, like, you can really dish out a lot of pain to your opponent, because again, this one's more focused also on burn damage, I should have mentioned earlier. But Topologic Trisbenia, because most of the time you're not going to... This deck is not back row heavy, so you don't have to worry about banishing your own spell or traps most of the time at all. So, like, you special summon a monster. You can even use Hornet Drones, honestly. Special summon one of the tokens. Trisbenia's effect will trigger off, banish the token, banish all your opponent's spell and traps, and he takes damage for each one for 500 points. So, Trisbenia is just straight up hilarious. Of course, we got the Firewall, just so we can perform the Firewall OTK combo. And Saryuja, which actually boosts the synergy. If I had a Borreload, for sure I would have ran a Borreload, but I don't have one, so I'm still waiting for the reprints on the Megatins this year. So hopefully once I pick those up, which, by the way, if you guys want me to, I'll definitely do a tin opening for you guys. If y'all want me to, just let me know in the comments if y'all want me to do that. I already have plans on getting like one of each of the tins anyway, and if y'all want me to just do an opening for you guys, I'll definitely do that for you. Alright, so moving on for the rest of the extra deck, we have, of course, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, Windwitch Winterbill, Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, Baguska, and finally Tornado Dragon, which helps because, you know, this card's also an MST. So Tornado Dragon is really good and his attack's not half bad. And it's great that he's also getting a reprint too, so I'm really happy for that. Because at least if I get more of them, I can run them in more decks that I have. Alright, so moving on to the side deck, we got, well, I'll just start from the traps actually. We got Wall of Disruption. The reason I decided to run this is because, like, I noticed that the Nightmare Link monsters, like, if they're all co-linked, it's actually considerably hard to break that board. Especially if Phoenix and Cerberus are out, because, like, Phoenix keeps your opponent's co-link monsters from being destroyed by card effects, whereas though Cerberus keeps them from being destroyed by battle. But because they're technically filling up the entire board and just focusing and just like relying on those nightmare cards, like Gokis specifically, even Spirals do this too. With Wall of Disruption, they pretty much have enough monsters where all their monsters will just drop their attack points down to 0 and it's permanent. Because Wall of Disruption, even in Duel Links, is freaking annoying. It weakens your opponent's monsters by 800 points for every other monster they control. So, like, let's say he had 4 monsters times 8, so that's what, 32? No, maybe. Damn, I'm bad at math. Yeah, it'd be 3,200 points. So yeah, that would really screw him over. So yeah, Wall of Disruption, I think it's really good for this format. Of course, we also have Blazing Mirror Force, just because, like, this also hits you as well if you decide to use it. Now, this card is actually pretty good with Trickstars, because, like, Trickstars can pretty much use every spell in its arsenal, so it never really slows it down, but it's Contract with Dawn 1000. What it does is, like, you and your opponent both get to draw 1 card, but you'll both take 1,000 points of damage. And, of course, the card you draw, and from here on out, any card you draw must stay revealed, and if any of them are spell cards, you can't normal summon, so until you get rid of that spell. So, but the best way to do that is just set that spell. But the problem is, the reason why it doesn't hurt the Trickstars is because, like, again, we can pretty much use every spell right away. And also, like, if your opponent has a spell that maybe has some certain restriction that he just can't use, he has no choice but to set it and just waste his back row space. And you pretty much already know what it is, so you could just pop it later on if you wanted to. So yeah, Contract with Down 1000 is a pretty good side, especially if you want to try, like, the full Turbo Burn version of Trickstars. I'm sorry, my tongue got stuck. So yeah, which, by the way, I will do, like, a full pure Trickstar deck on just, like, the burn engine of it. I may have found a way to actually make it a little bit more consistent, because that was always the problem that I had with the Turbo Burn of Trickstars, because, like, it was a little too inconsistent. But I think I may have found something that might actually help, like, give it a little synergy. Alright, so moving on, we got 1 copy of Dark Hole. You never know. Upstart Goblin, which actually really helps, especially because it helps trigger off the, well, not trigger off, but boost the spells in your graveyard percentage with the Sky Striker card, so it really does make a big difference. And of course, I did mention I did have a 3rd Call by the Grave. Next up, we got Eagle Booster. If you control no monsters in your main monster zones, you can target 1 face-up monster on the field. That target is unaffected by card effects this turn, and also if you have 3 or more spells in your grave, that target cannot be destroyed by battle. So sometimes I like to side it in, you know, if I'm going to do, like, rely on the Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. This will help me a lot, just that way, like, avoid, like, cards like Borlo Dragon, and then keep them from being destroyed by battle as well. Next up, we got 1 Shark Cannon. Not a bad card. It's actually, I kind of like the way it looks, honestly. But you target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, or if you have 3 or more spells and traps, you can special summon that monster to your side of the field, but it can't attack. So I feel like the banishment effect of this card is a little bit better, so I was like, why not? And of course, we have Multi-Roll. I remember when this card was like was like $10 when it came out, but now it's like worth cents. So I'm like, what? How'd this card go from like 10 to just cents? But, you know, it happens. That's why I never, like, buy cards right off the bat when they first come out, because you never know if the prices are just going to drop. But it's pretty good, because, like, what it does, like, once per turn you can target 1 other card you control, send that card to the graveyard. Also, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response, so that's also pretty good. And that's for the rest of the turn, by the way. and you can only what's also good is that even if this card leaves the field, you can still resolve this effect. You can only gain the previous effect once per turn. Once per turn during the end phase, you can set one Sky Striker spell with a different name from your graveyard up to the same number of Sky Striker cards you activated this turn. So it's actually pretty good just to, like boost your variety with the Sky Striker spells. So yeah, multi-roll is not a bad card. I personally like it, but it's only a good one of. So yeah, and the fact that your opponent can't respond to it is also pretty good. So like, yeah, I think it's a good side off, and if I ever have to main it, I'll main it. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I will catch you again next time.